Thank you, Shaykh Fadhlalla, for finding the time to have this extended conversation or dialogue, partly with your own biography, personal biography, but far more interesting is the way in which you evolved in terms of spiritual awakening and moving through the various phases and cycles. You were born in Karbala in 1937, I believe, to a family of well-known and well-established religious scholars in the Shia Islamic tradition. Your great-grandfather was one of the region's most notable grand ayatollahs. And through that line, there evolved a number of people who moved more towards the spiritual rather than the jurisprudential aspect of Islam. Through your grandfather, father, and uncles, do you feel that you were connected to this long tradition at an early age? Did you feel that?
I felt the atmospheres in our home because it was at the end of several generations where there had been traditions, there had been way of life that was very well established, taken for granted. So I remember from early childhood that the courtesies, the manners, the way of receiving guests, the way of feeding the poor or coming in the house, out, it was very well established and very as though normal. So I imbibed what was at that time to me as a child as a very enjoyable, healthy, extended family, because there were 4 homes connected with each other. And without being indoctrinated as to what was the family heritage or its religious or spiritual lineage, I was brought up in an atmosphere of confidence and awareness of one's conduct and visitors and others and helping and serving. So I felt part and parcel of the whole household, which was fairly extensive. So I must have imbibed that atmosphere of having come from a line of people who were regarded by that community and that society as leaders or elite in the religious and spiritual hierarchy.
In your book, which is a memoir, biography of called The Son of Karbala, which came out a few years ago, you described a quintessential pre-modern town in the sense of a life that was integrated, work, home life, religious life was integrated into a whole, and that while you were in your childhood, early childhood, this was, as it were, the defining features of life in that town, in that city, the interconnectedness between these various aspects of outer community life. Did that sense of interconnectedness also spill over into one's spiritual or inner life? Did you feel that there was a connection between the outer conduct and people's inner realities?
The idea of spiritual life or religious life being separate from day-to-day life only began to occur to me much later. I never saw, I grew up in an atmosphere that they were seamless. And also the neighborhood, the extended, if you like, township and what all of the things around us, the 7 or 8 mahallat of Karbala. I really grew up feeling that this is a very well-integrated city where there was no crime, where there was no thievery, there was no, I never heard even a quarrel outside the home or anywhere else. So I took it for granted that this is what it is everywhere else. The shock of the shocks came also, especially when I left Iraq at a young age for scholarship to Europe. Baghdad and other visits didn't also shake me out of that illusion that every town or every city, the people are respectful of each other, they know their position in life, helpful to each other. A lot of exchanges and bartering without it being also strict barter. So I grew up in an atmosphere that was really at the end of a caravan that had been, if you like, evolving for hundreds of years without me knowing that. Spiritual life, religious life, conduct, day-to-day commerce, they were seamlessly connected.
Looking at the memoirs of others of that period of the time, it was, as it were, a generalized condition in that part of the world, that there was no clear distinction or division, nor should there have been a clear distinction and division. When did the beginnings of this disruption, this juncture, as it were, take place?
Where it began, and in my particular case, I saw the huge gap within 2 to 3 years when I left for scholarship to Britain, and when I came back. It was as though it was suddenly just abruptly broke. Of course, I had grown up a bit more. My understanding of life and outside world changed. But I really noticed that within 3 or 4 years, there was nothing left there whatsoever of what I knew or what I was familiar with.
So, to what do you attribute the fact that you had this generations-long stability, all of a sudden abruptly cracking, and then the younger people turning themselves away from it?
Yeah. I think Karbala was to a great extent like a city-state. And once the Iraqi government and the political, if you like, cohesion of the country and the oil or whatever other revenue began to come, and the central government, it was a self-governing city until, I think, the effect of the central government and the effect of that came to the city. I think I would say that this long caravan of hundreds of years, interrupted every now and then by invasions from other neighboring places or certain disasters, natural disasters like floods or whatever. I think really the final thing was with the central government.
You mentioned in our earlier conversations that you went through World War II without knowing there was a World War.
I, as a kid, again, being an extended household, so there was one room dedicated for tea and coffee. It was called Sanduq Khana, where there was 2 or 3 big boxes where the packets or boxes of teas were kept and coffees and so on, and there would always be hot boiling water on top of a stove. And I remember there were 2 or 3 pots or bowls of sugar. And I, as a kid, will go there, and I suddenly noticed one of the bowls of sugar was brown sugar. And I preferred it actually to the white. So when I heard somebody, a town crier, crying that the war is over, so I asked, I said, what does it mean the war is over? They said, don't you remember the brown sugar? This is because of the war. That is about all.
Extraordinary. It must have been a very comforting
self-sustaining town. Everything was made there. Cloths were made there. Shoes were made there. Leather would come raw. There were 7 or 8 different districts where you have the artisans, a bit like what you have in North Africa and Fez, for example, which has been preserved as a World Heritage. It was like that. There was one area was mostly leatherwork, shoes, and so on, and they will make it for you as you want. And other is cloth makers, merchants, other than the grain and the food. It was very much of a self-sustained town. And every week or 2 or 3, there will be a large caravan of the desert nomads and Bedouins that come to the edge of the town. And there was one particular camp, few minutes away from our own home, where 20, 30, 50, 100, sometimes few hundred camels, depending on the size of the camel thing. And they will bring their goods to the town to buy and sell. They buy tea, they buy tobacco, a few other things, matches, and they load. To take usually a couple of days or 3 days. For me, that was one of the most enjoyable sights. So one of the servants will take me to see. And what amazed me also, how the family, the husband, wife, and occasionally the kids, will be totally cooperating in the activity of offloading and unloading. And the women's influence was considerable. I mean, the wife was completely as though in her own right doing her things, and there was a partnership, unlike our own homes in the city, where the woman was much more in hijab and in the house, and So I used to enjoy these caravans, and this was part of the, if you like, commercial lifeline between Karbala and the outside world and the desert world. So these people will bring a lot of goods, a lot of leather, a lot of hair, a lot of this and that, and would exchange it. It was a very living town, and of course the biggest industry of the town was burying the dead. On average, I would imagine as a kid, every day there will be 20, 30, 50 dead bodies being brought to Karbala to be buried either near the shrine of Imam Hussein or in the main public cemetery, which was in the sprawling desert. And as the dead body is taken through, you find people from shops or wherever they hear it or they see it, they jump out in order to hold the dead bodies joining into that. And there's again following a tradition that if you do that, imagine yourself dead in the box rather than. So it was a very unusual atmosphere. Death, life in between, without a great deal of noise. I mean, what struck me most after I left is that I had not come across a crime in the whole city. And I don't remember there were any courts, I hardly remember seeing a policeman.
This passage in early youth through this, in many ways one would call a kind of utopia, in the sense of balance and equilibrium and serenity and a twinning of one's inner and outer life. It must have left an extremely powerful imprint on you. And that, would you say that part of your subsequent life was an attempt to regain part of these certainties that were imprinted on you?
Not consciously, because I knew it is done and it's gone. Because I remember as a kid asking Imam Hussein, should I stay in Iraq, can I leave? And it was very clear to me that no, things are not going to be at all what I was used to, and I should get out. So I felt really that I cannot reproduce any of that. And the biggest shocks to me were actually the cultural shocks from what I was used to, took it as normal, to what was very much of a Western world, which was Britain, so to speak, soon after the war.
I mean, here you have a relatively stable, trouble-free, serene childhood, and suddenly drastic change enters into the equation. How do you see change? How do they impinge on the individual? Is an individual seeking permanent stability?
No doubt. I seek permanent and utter peace and constancy and predictability. But equally, I also know in every way that this world we are living in, the world of space and time, essentially a world of change and constant change. So I learned by practice also that the more I refer to my inner constancy, the more I can have a better perspective regarding the change. The bigger is the change or the shock, I think the easier it's for me to rationally deal with it or dismiss it or whatever by referring to the zone within me which is not subject to change.
This abrupt break, a disjuncture or discontinuity, either embrace the idea of perpetual change or try to seek some form of stability in a backward-looking traditionalism. Did that ever affect you?
I think it is there. I personally also have, for many years, tried to interact with the change, see the upside of it and the downside of it, but also try and go into my innermost stillness rather than any backward or any illusory or fantasy idea of how the world was perfect. I never ever believed as a child or subsequently that the past was better than the present or worse. I never have this notion. I think the perfection is there always, imperfection is there always. It's just the extent of it and the impact of it upon people changes. I think I somehow remember it even as a kid, knowing that nothing that I like I can keep for long, and yet I want to have access or to have a state where I feel happy or content with. And from childhood, I think the sound of Quran and things like this also, which was all the time recited from the shrine, which was directly, we had no separation between our homes and the mazar of Imam Hussein. I remember that sound had a big effect upon me, always like a tranquilizer. And I remember later on myself also taking on to reciting a line or two just to give me that calmness.
So would you say that in your early childhood you did not have a direct experience of duality, that there are opposites?
I did, often by also abusing my overeating nuts or whatever goodies that I liked. No, I remember, I didn't intellectualize it as I do now, that the whole of existence is based on opposites. But no, I have realized the swing between, what is good and what is bad and what is healthy or not. No, I was aware of all of that, and I tried, as I said, to deal with it as best as I can.
I mean, most people have this sense of security, stability, and then all of a sudden they have to deal with change and flux.
Yes.
And would the tools, as it were, with dealing with change and flux, are they established when you're very young, or do they need to be acquired subsequently?
Acquired subsequently, but I think the seeds of it must have been there. Because I remember at the time of cultural shocks in Britain, I would often prefer to be quiet and settle down my agitation and mental anguish or whatever, quieten down slowly and to get replenished. So I think I got used to it fairly early on, that the source of the referencing to quietness and balance is within me. And some people also were helpful to me to be with. Some others, as you may say now, bad chemistry, or they irritate you. So that too was there.
Well, speaking about chemistry, your father was one of the most well-known alchemists. How did that affect you when you saw him in his laboratory? Did you ask him what he was doing?
I knew what he was doing from what I've heard a lot about what he was doing from others. It was in the family. I think it has been there for many generations. Several of his older relatives have had big accidents, blow up, and one of his cousins went blind, and so there were several of them within that lineage. I was not intrigued. I took it as part of day-to-day life. He would go every morning for half an hour or so, and every afternoon also, in order to put on a furnace or switch off something. And there were a lot of liquids bubbling and creating a lot of dreadful smells. I knew that he is up to something special, and he was obviously passionately connected with it. And every year or so there will be somebody visiting, often an odd person from some country or another, in order to exchange with him about the inner secrets of alchemy. It was part of the package of where I was born. I didn't find it exceptionally odd, or I felt also there would be others in the country or elsewhere who would be doing the same thing. Then later on in life, I remember him saying that that's it, it is done, and what he was after he had realized. And obviously it was not turning every piece of metal into gold either. But there were telltale signs that something also had happened physically. And I remember him in a discussion with someone on that issue. He said, ultimately, the philosopher's stone is you. You have to realize that it is all that. But to get to that point, you need to have been through a lot of cul-de-sacs and a lot of disappointments. And to bring, I remember also talking about patience. He says, once your patience becomes infinite, then you are at the edge.
So would you say the practice of alchemy, astrology, anything in which the action itself is in order to seek out signs of the sacred or divinity, once it loses that focus, becomes a pointless exercise? Yeah. Would you agree with that?
I'm sure. Well, I think that's how it was in his case. Yes. It wasn't after an outcome, outwardly. It was after, producing gold and making, having wealth or something. I knew for sure it wasn't that, because all of his other behavior was also not concerned with such outcomes. Because I remember there were a number of occasions where he was offered a lot of things, places, homes. For example, there were a lot of property in different parts of Iraq that people came to him, they said this is being claimed because the people are living there without rent for 20 years, and now the new law, they can claim it. He said, well, they deserve it. So I remember a number of people in his in his company saying, but look, this is yours and your families and so on and so forth, and you could use the money for other charities, whatever. He said, this is the best charity, they are there. So there were a lot of such opportunities. So I knew there wasn't the element of making money or getting wealth and so on wasn't at all on his agenda.
So any material outcome, transubstantiation of metals and one into the other,
no,
was never...
I think it was the process.
Yeah. And the process is to find traces in science.
Yes. I was not really in any way initiated into that, nor was I really interested, but I knew it was about his inner deep, if you like, transformation of some sort. I didn't know what it meant.
But you knew intuitively, or how?
I felt that he is pursuing something that is the most important in his life, and it has no visible outcome that I can gauge.
Later, during your high school or secondary school years, you excelled in the academic field, and you were then offered a scholarship to study in England. When you arrived in England, which is probably the antithesis of Karbala, did you have what is known as the shock of the modern? Were you in a state of...
I still am in that shock. Absolutely. No, it was, absolutely, no.
How did you see England? How did you see this entirely different society and culture? How did you relate it to the one that you had left behind?
There were things I had to do. In the morning I had to go to the college to take notes. The few things that shocked me most were actually like queuing for food. I considered that to be very demeaning. Standing up in a line for minutes or whatever in order to have few peas in those days were still a bit of potato or something in your plate, which I never liked anyway. So I felt quite a number of their habits to what I was used to culturally were quite an anathema. But I adopted to it. I had to survive. So
and then you maintained for a while your religious practices and rituals.
For the first 2-3 years, I think I was very much, for example, I couldn't be away for too many hours in case I need to go to the bathroom for ablution, for whatever, to be on wudu. But it fell off after 3-4 years. I began to lapse.
Lapse because you didn't find any utility in them, or because something
slowly
else
by slowly it got
them?
eroded, and there was nobody else to keep me, in a way in line or encourage. Slowly by slowly I began to miss it. The timing wasn't right. Maghrib, you are in a lecture or in a something, so
just drifted
it lapsed.
Away. Also, I think the 1950s was not a particularly religious phase in time, so that
Yes, no.
lots of those who had learned these practices probably abandoned
Yes.
them at that time. Then you came back to Iraq armed with a degree in, I think, science and applied chemistry, and you joined the Iraq Petroleum Company, where you rose meteorically in the ranks and were slated for the highest posts. What was then, in this period, in your early to mid-20s, I suppose, did you try to maintain a sense of spiritual engagement, as it were, or were you also focusing on your work and on your family, your young family?
Very much ambition to excel, do the best possible in my profession, family, their education, my well-beingness, enjoying life as a, young, if you like, oil company executive. But I had always had a soft spot, if you like, for the spiritual or religious side, wherever I could find it. Including in the oil company, there was a Jesuit man called Father Fear Frenchman, was I think probably the head of the Jesuits in Baghdad. He would visit the oil company once every couple of months, stay for a week or longer. He was doing a lot of research on the Assyrians in Iraq. And I really adored that man. I think it was reciprocated. He was much older than I. And it was an unusual, if you like, friendship, deep, deep, deep friendship. And there were quite a number of incidents and people like that, including some of my own staff who were below me rank-wise. But I found their religious and spiritual piety or whatever so appealing. So I would be more with them because of that. So it wasn't formal that I'm seeking something, but I was naturally attracted to, there would be at least once every 2-3 weeks some shepherds from outside the fence of the compound with their sheep. And I would love to go, Kurdish mostly. I would love to talk to them. And what separated us was this electric wire fence, which was very high. And somehow I'd managed to get out of the compound, sit with them or walk with them. I've always loved the simple, the clean people on the outside, or the sophisticated people like this top Jesuit, for example, without a great deal of sophisticated discussion or exchange. You know, I could just feel empathy and love for them. It remained with me. I can remember many incidents from people who were not of any similar type of background. But there was that inner feel that these people have got another dimension that is alive.
Which was never lost in you, or it could never be lost.
Supposed to. But for me, it was always a big, big attraction. Older people, poorer people. I've always enjoyed being with them. All the time.
Then towards the end of the 1960s, you saw the beginning of the end for this foreign enclave with its special privileges and its special lifestyle, and you hastened to depart, even though you were asked to stay because you're on the fast track to becoming, as it were, the chief executive of this enterprise. What made you see that this project was doomed?
I think it was an erosion again over a period of maybe a year or two. I found it so artificial, us living in such a pampered environment and just separated by a fence from what was perhaps biblical time or before even. And so there were so many indications that impinged upon me that made me actually physically ill. I became ill for several months, digestive problems, gastric issues. I was not happy. Looking back at it, it was perhaps the most miserable time in my life. Outwardly, here I am, pampered, promised this and that your progress, your this and that. But I felt inwardly empty, unhappy, miserable. Also, I felt this is not sustainable. Iraq is not sustainable. I felt the whole thing is, months on end, I would feel that I am sitting on a volcano. So until I found the earliest opportunity, because I wasn't allowed to leave also. At that time I was in a sensitive job, evaluating the reserves and establishing optimum techniques for extraction, linear programming and all of that things in mathematics. So I was doing a very critical job. I was under a huge, if you like, focus from the authorities, not to leave, not to do this. So I couldn't leave in any way. So eventually I had to enroll in a postgraduate course, and I had to get the approval of everybody, which happened very quickly, and I left.
So it wasn't just the sense that a prescient analysis of the outer conditions that this is doomed. It was more to do with the fact that you were deeply unhappy and unsatisfied.
I was caught from every angle, physically, mentally, culturally. I just felt completely out of sort, out of place, out of time. And I didn't know what was the answer either, but I knew this is not. I had to, it was really that this is not it. Get out, irrespective. That's what I did.
Just that action itself, did it leave you satisfied or still dissatisfied?
I'm still dissatisfied even now. But no, that was, it's all relative. It was very satisfactory. because also the Iraq Petroleum Company was still after me to go back. So that gave me a bit of a security that, look, if the worst comes to the worst, I can go back on better terms. But I knew this is not the right thing to do. I knew this is retrograde and I should just have patience and a bit of courage. And it took a while. I mean, patience and courage were not that easy also to give me that contentment. It was tough. But I was delighted to have done it. What really saved me were totally unintended events. I mean, every now and then I would try to, as they say, bite the bullet and stay the course. And then suddenly something unexpected happened that gave me another, lift in that course. I wanted to be independent. I wanted to be in a situation that I'm not totally enslaved to a fixed salary. As though I was waiting for my subsequent encounter with Chinmaya and others to be able to take time off as and when I wanted.
Then you leave England, you went to Beirut, established your private independent consulting company, and excelled, at least in business matters. And in one of your visits to the Gulf or to Kuwait, you came across this extraordinary person, Chinmaya, whom you have said many times was the most important influence on your life.
As good as anybody could have it. When I saw this man, I somehow felt he has something I don't have. And so I happened to be on the same flight, and I wanted to know who he is. So I took the excuse of going after his forehead dot of booty. So I asked him, what is this? He said, you're not asking about this, sit down. So I was still at that time young and full of my own biographical successes. So anyway, I sat down and he said, look, you're really after to know what is the secret of total inner contentment and happiness. He then said something very strange. He said, you have maybe I had 2 or 3 cars. He said, you have cars, you have all of this. You're not really deep down totally happy and content. I said, my God, this man is reading my innermost, quite dangerous. So that was the encounter. I knew he has something I don't have. But it was later on that I knew that it isn't something I must have. It is what I have to lose. That which he had, I have also, and everybody else has. Later on, as he taught me, he said, nobody has more than anybody else. It's just that they have their own illusions, they have their desires, they have their attachments. Those you have to get rid of. So that's what really was, for me, the biggest clear mapping as to how balanced life could be.
But such dramatic encounters, I mean, I know you don't really attribute to them kind of overarching significance, but they seem to be a recurrent theme, that something dramatic, untoward happens, and a person is then reawakened to one's potential. Is this something that is necessary or emblematic, let's say, or not?
I think nature puts us all through such possibilities, including disasters. I think the biggest gift of nature is disasters. But we blame and claim and we don't go into the meaning of them. So encounters, unusual events are galore. But we are preoccupied somewhere else. I remember in Beirut, across my apartment, there would be at Fajr, you know how Beirut also at that time beginning to have chaos. And this was a street sweeper right on Rosher, next to the ocean. The way he swept, it was as though he was caressing his mother's hair or some beauty. So, I was so intrigued about the way this man was treating his job. He was present in it. And when I ventured to be near him and ask him, he wouldn't even talk to me. He would just say, I'm doing my job. So encounters become significant if you give them that significance. In the case of Chinmaya, it was dramatic, I don't deny that. But I've had many such lessons. One of the biggest lessons I remember was from a very old Sudanese lady in the Prophet's precinct, next to the Prophet's tomb in Medina. I was going for my lunch, I was a bit delayed and I was very hungry. She was selling peanuts. So I thought I'll buy a little bit of peanuts before I get to my lunch. I knew there's a fabulous lunch waiting for me. So, and I didn't want to carry coins because they rattle in my pocket. So I took a small cone because I wasn't going to eat too much. So, and gave her a note. So she wanted to return for me coins. I said, no, please take the coins. She took the coin back from my hand, emptied it back, and gave me the note. She said, go. I said, but look, I can't eat it all. She said, that's your problem. I have to sell you at the price that it is. The money is your problem. I mean, that was for me one of the best lessons. I've had many such encounters. I can quote you dozens of such things.
I'm sure.
A porter in Mumbai, where I tipped him more than his daily wage. But the way I tipped it was as though I am condescending. You know, here I am, this important person, giving you more than your daily wage as a tip. He returned it to me. The way he looked at me, he said, do you think I need you? So, I mean, these are encounters. You know, they're huge encounters.
After meeting Chinmaya, as I recall from your discussions on this time in this period, you spent about 8 years, 7 to 8 years, visiting him on a regular basis, being in his company, traveling with him. What was the central theme of all of that? Was it an attempt to try to rediscover the forces inside you? What was it all about?
I didn't have such a clear agenda at all. It was attraction and constant benefits. It was love, really. Whenever I was with him, I enjoyed every minute as though I was having a reconstitutional, if you like, revamping. And seeing a man in this world operating in a manner that doesn't leave any precipitation upon him was for me the ultimate gift. Here he is acting all kinds of projects, hundreds, thousands of people, every 2 weeks in one location, having a program of expounding upon the Gitas and so on. And yet, as though he was not touched, engaging with people, sharing with them, laughing with the young people, participating in life, and yet an element or aspect in him was above it or not touched by it. This for me was the most fascinating possibility on existence.
And one thing jumps out is that you come from a tradition, at least an outer tradition, that is completely unique, self-contained in itself. And then to be attracted to a person from, as it were, a polar opposite is really quite unusual. I mean, I don't know any case of a person raised in a, as it were, in a Muslim tradition, making such a, or taking a teacher at such an exalted level, a person from an entirely different tradition. And if I just an amusing anecdote, it was when that had happened, the news somehow filtered back into our own social circles. And it was seen as an extremely aberrant, even outrageous event, that the son of one of Karbala's most famous religious scholars and alims becomes, as it were, a Hindu. Of course, this was a complete misconstruing of what actually happened. But when you encountered Chinmaya, you seemed not to have any cultural baggage with you.
No. Also, I didn't see any, as you described it as being from the opposite. There was no opposite. I found in him a conduct or a quality that I was familiar with. I really didn't find it at all incongruous. And nor did I have any interest in the rituals. Nor did he in any way try to have me initiated in any of the Hindu practices or rituals. He was way above it. And he saw me as a visitor who had come as though I've come there to be illumined or to like a candle to be lit, and that was it. There was no other, they wasn't going to reshape me or rechange me or none of those whatsoever. He was the most gracious host, and the people around him were most generous to me, and I was imbibing conduct. that he was giving, and what he received was much more from the unseen. There was nothing visible. I mean, he lived as a sannyas, he had his saffron robe, and when he traveled to even foreign lands and so on, it was the tiniest of all little suitcases. So for me, it was really traveling with a godly being in the shape or in the form or a cultural background of a Hindu. So, also in Karbala, we had a lot of visitors from India. So I wasn't unfamiliar with the, if you like, the outer appearances of their dress or the women in their sari. But for me, it was an immense love affair.
But it seems that he didn't treat you as a classical disciple or murid in a teacher-taught relationship. He treated you as a person about to be an equal, I assume.
Absolutely. Totally. Totally. I share with you, for example, a case where there was a hospital. And this was a big hospital in central India. And there were, it's a big, sizable hospital. And the top doctors were quarreling about jockeying for a new position. So he was going there, and I would travel with him. There were only two of us. After a day or two, we would be there in the boardroom. He told them that, look, you have been sacrificing your life, you've been learning, you have been benefiting. So this way of for you competing with each other is not conducive for the charity that you are also offering and so on. So they were all ashamed and they all accepted to whatever between them. Even at the end, they were offering each other the higher position, the declining. In other words, humbleness began to. So he suddenly turned quietly to me, because being an outsider, this is why I'm giving you this example. He said, let us leave before they discover the whole thing is a nonsense, being on this world. Let's get out before. So, I mean, there were things like this that he confided in me, if you like, in the Sufi language, deep secrets, so to speak. The asrar, there was no secrets there. He says, look, this whole business of life on this earth is a tiny little, flesh. Your soul, your ruh, the atman in you is alive forever. That is why you are here to discover it. So there was nothing in his teaching, in his exchanges with me, was incongruous to what I had known or felt would be part of what I would have known had I stayed more in the, if you like, higher level of Islamic, if you like, Arfani traditions. Not once have I found any opposition or difficulty in it, whatsoever.
In his being, he seems to have absorbed all the great religious traditions and transcended them.
Absolutely. Transcended them, I think, is the key, because as time went by, he would even greet me in an Islamic way. Salaamu Alaikum, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, things like that. And at the end, I was beginning to feel on occasions that his favoritism towards me was causing some jealousy and some envy and so on, because I was not to stay there. I mean, they appointed me to be as part of many of their boards of charities and so on. I never attended. And they called me Shaykh Haeri, whatever. So I was given a very high, if you like, position amongst the hierarchy there. He didn't care about it, I didn't care about it. Others tried without much pushing. I must say they were courteous. But I never took to any of the rituals, cultures, or whatever. I enjoyed the chanting. I would go into a trance or into deep meditation. But that's about it. I was there really to take. I was there absolutely to take what was God-given and ignoring the human side.
Here you are in an airport. You bump into a person whom you immediately take on to be your guide and teacher. You spend 7 years with him. The person does not try to influence in any shape or form. The way in which you were formed religiously did not try to impose on you any structures or strictures. And then here we come to the third most astounding aspect. He basically asked you to leave and go back to your own spiritual traditions. Yes. Why would he do that?
I think he realized that I now am, I must have the outer boundaries or a frame, because I wasn't practicing Hinduism with him, I wasn't practicing. So I think he must have felt that I now have to unite the haqiqah part that I began to absorb from him with an outer manifestation. I think he wanted me to be within the full package, if you like. I think he knew as a doctor that the medication I've had enabled me now to accept the full, if you like, the medical package.
I mean, to put it another way, would you say that he wanted to, you had this core, this heart, this central teaching, he wanted to give it a kind of protective sheath?
I don't think he wanted, I think he must have felt I needed it now.
Needed.
I think it was a doctor treating a patient. That there wasn't much more for me just carrying on. It would have been more of the same. And I would be enjoying it and I'm very happy and nobody wants to be weaned. But I think he felt that I needed now this medicine of accepting the outer and accepting the culture, accepting the history, you know, in a sense.
And then I remember you said, you wrote to him and you said, what was obvious to you is now obvious to me.
Yes.
So the obvious has become the obvious.
That's it.
In its utter simplicity.
In the sense that it was said before, I thought I understand it because all to do with the mind and the intellect. But now I know it, that there's none other than the one, and you have to be constantly in reference to that because that's your life. Everything else is peripheral. So that's the truth.
So you basically experienced what was always there, an all-encompassing zone that is not accessible through the intellect or through.
That's right. Which later on, as I began to reflect upon it more, teach a bit more, I realized that really life is based on these two zones. One is a life that has got its main emphasis through space and time, with beginning such as birth and end such as death. And this life is attributed to the person, and this life is, in a way, takes over its need or its manifestation of survival as a key thing. This is one zone, but the real purpose or the real direction is a life that is infinite, or a consciousness that is boundless. And the two are inseparable. And I then began to also interpret some of the teachings from our own traditions and the Quran, that, for example, these two oceans meet in you. One of them does not overcome the other. One ocean is timelessness, infinitude, and the other one is limited, which is the so-called me. And if the so-called me does not lead me to the ultimate reality in me, which is my soul or spirit, then I'm not liberated. Then I've not completed the journey. Then I'm still under that, you know, limiting, if you like, dimension. So it began to unfold, and many of what I learned also with Chinmaya and others, with Krishnamurti and a few other people, made sense. And I felt our deen has it all in a simpler way. But it has to be lived, and it can only be lived by those who are living it as well. It has to be transmitted, not just maintained as a formal, if you like, ritual. And that really dawned upon me, and I felt so fortunate for not being forced also into the ritualistic side without having it complemented with the transformative side. So I think it was perfect timing for me to come back and rediscover, if you like, the Muhammadi path and package as most workable and easy, provided it is totally absorbed rather than talked about or preached. It has to be in every way accepted, and then a person will realize its fruit, which is personal. That your thinking is not the same. Your lens of relating events is not the same. It takes you to another dimension. And I think this is what really happens. So Chinmaya was essential in that, to prepare me. In other words, it was my Mecca. It was anything goes, anything is possible. It's only light. There's nothing else. Everything else is a fallacy. But I had to come and live in this world, you know, to see the fallacy has in it truth as well. Chaos has order in it as well. So it was the right way, in a sense, without me knowing that, without me But I somehow inadvertently have been put through a program of first coming to taste there is this magnificent, absolute, ever-present reality. It's a mystery. But equally, the early steps of it, the human side of it, which leads to the divine side of it, is there in a way reflecting it, but in a diluted fashion. You know, and that is all of it is indicating its origin. And so I came back to live it, and I found that it was correct. You know, it was real. Even the troubles and the difficulties one is subjected to have their outer, if you like, manifestation, which we want to avoid, but an inner teaching and learning, which if we dissociate ourselves from the event, then we find a great deal of meaning and development and evolvement from.
And then came a period where you encountered all kinds of quite remarkable people, mainly spiritual teachers in the Sufi tradition. Probably the most significant in terms of your future development was Shaykh Abdul Qadir, the Scottish, or the Scots formerly known as Ian Dallas.
Yes.
He was your first port of call, as it were.
Yes.
And Chinmaya pointed him out as
Yes.
being possibly your starting point in re-entering into your own religious tradition. What did you get from that experience, the early experiences with Shaykh Abdul Qadir?
I felt there was a great deal of genuine, serious movement, that these people from an alien culture, Western, British, European, Scottish, visiting them in their different places, especially in their main centers in England, reminded me as though they were trying to live early Islam in its simplicity. A very strong Sufi, Moroccan type of flavor. At that time, they were very much into that. So they were dressed as Moroccans. They changed, you know, the styles a few times as time went by. But I felt it is as close as you can get to original or early Islam. Yeah. It was very attractive, very, very beautiful in that sense. And I imbibed a lot of that, and in fact it reminded me a lot of my childhood in Karbala. You know, I found it exceptionally easy to be with them. The generosity, the gifting, the serving, the helping, and all of that, and the communal type of living. So for me it was an easy re-entry to what I considered my own interpretation as original Islam. I felt these people are trying to really get to that point. And they're sincere, real, and honest. And so it was for me a big, big gift in every way.
I mean, would you say that experience and subsequent engagements or encounters with other such people opened for you the need, as it were, to translate this unfoldment in the absolute into outer action?
Absolutely, inseparably. I also felt that because of history, because of the usual natural atrophies, that the rank and file of most Muslims is not in any way according to the original package, which is the outer and the inner are inseparable, and a ritual without a meaning is ridiculous, and a meaning without a form also cannot exist. So I found that really we have within the Muhammadi package all what is needed, but it needs to be lived, and also it needs to be reflected by others. And also I realized the importance of teachers who can impart with that. And I think this, to my mind, was the recognition of the impoverishment of most of the Muslim communities, unless they were enlightened teachers. And of course the Sufis had that line. I also realized early on with Shaykh Abdul Qadir that the days of the Sufi traditions of lines and of all of that and their habits cannot last. I felt that the impact of the hegemony of the Western way of life and its secular emphasis and all of that will put an end to the hundreds of years of tradition of Sufis maintaining what I consider to be original Islam, with a flavor. Each tariqah had a different flavor. So these were very early, if you like, inner insights of mine. That that incredible gift that came to all human beings for hundreds or thousands of years will come to an end soon. Something else better may replace it, but I don't know what. Now I can say it was that the horizontal aspect of spreading the human balance of humanity, divinity, would come to an end, and now it has to be vertical. Individuals must within themselves experience the presence of the absolute. And then they also have to accept boundaries and accept the ethics and all that. So,
in your, you talk about the absolute as, in its essence, it's obviously unreachable. It is one that cannot be approached either by state or by intellect. But at least those elements inside the human constitution, as it were, that can reverberate with it. In order for you to reach that zone of absolute transcendence, of that zone of absolute consciousness, the presence, as it were, the entire world seems to conspire in order to put a stop to this natural human desire or impulse. So
yeah.
what is a counter to that? If the outer material world, human relationships, community, culture, psychology, sociology, everything about the way that the modern world is constructed conspires against the person trying to make that leap.
Yeah.
So what is it that is left in the individual that allows him or her to make that leap?
I think the biggest obstacle is the human mind. There are three big obstacles. The human mind, because it is geared to give me better survival on this earth. So it wants to perpetuate that. As a result, the language also becomes odd because it says, how do you reach it? There is nothing to reach. I am obsessed by it. I am possessed by it. God dominates. The light of God is the only light from which every other light emanates. So it isn't something I can reach. So this is because I've been used to constantly get it, reach it, take it, output, outcome. So I'm used to the survival zone of consciousness, which is tiny, and I'm trying to now experience and come to live and know the arrival zone, which is the absolute or the supreme consciousness or pure consciousness. It's the other way around. So this business of everything in existence seems to conspire, as I am conspiring. Because I've not been given from the beginning this simple diagram or a drawing or a map that, look, you are two entities. Your one is to do with mind and biography and identity and fear of time and the treasuring of time, and the other one is your timelessness. I've not been given that simply, but it is in our deen. The Quran is full of it. I can only see the Quran and the teaching or the prophetic teaching through that lens. If you distill the entire Quran into what it is that there is only oneness. But as long as I see two-ness, I see I and otherness and enemies, and so I'm not within that, ultimate, if you like, truth that the Quran reveals, that there's only oneness. The other thing that the Quran, if you distill it all, is that your life begins after you leave your body, akhirah. The whole thing is about akhirah. We don't give any attention. So leave it. So later on, طال عمرك. So our natural day-to-day habits is not according to that primal map. That this phase of existence, as all the Abrahamic traditions teach, when Jesus says it's like a bridge, you don't build a house in the middle of a bridge, we don't live it anymore. It has become the all-consuming, and that's all what matters. So that's why people say, but now let us be real. This reality is a flimsy reality that has in it some spark of absolute reality, total reality, timeless reality, spaceless reality. So, I see the whole conspiracy is us human beings have only built our entire thing on this beginning part of our spiritual, or if you like, evolution altogether. We're not evolved. That's why we are killing ourselves, we are killing the ecology, we're desperate about everything. We become outwardly far more wealth outwardly, and also equally a lot of poverty inwardly. So I think we are not following nature. I think we are actually against nature. Nature is that Homo sapiens began to discover some other zone of consciousness. That is why we are really distinguished from the other, if you like, apes and so on. But we're not following that. And we separated it. This is spiritual matter. Now this is a church issue or a mosque issue. Once you begin to separate it, then we are broken down. We become schizophrenic. But I am both. I am a human. Once my human side is fulfilled, my body is in reasonable state, my mind is reasonably, clear, and so on. Then I want to know what else, what next. And if I don't go to the transcendental of it, I become greedy. I become, I create chaos, as we are doing. Most of our, wealthier people could have stopped much earlier in accumulating and being abusive and being unjust by caring for themselves. But no, control, control, control. I feel I'm totally under control, but I don't attempt to control. If it is given to me something to control, put this there, so I will do it. Minimal. So the question of decree and destiny, to what extent am I free, or to what extent it is predestined? I am free only in limited situations. I am free to speak or not to speak, or few things. But I'm not free to say that if I do this and this and this, in 5 years' time I'll be the happiest man on earth. No way. I will never be. There are so many new factors that comes that will change my destiny. So these are the things that we need to be shown or taught as kids, but we are not. So we have ended up by having few rituals, and therefore it becomes divisive. More sectarian, more this, more and more. They are not exactly the same. The otherness. The Quran says, not until you treat your enemy as your closest friend. Not until then. You are not near enough to be awakened as to who you really are. Once you discover that, then you find everybody else potentially is the same. Everybody is a spirit or a soul. They are divine, but they don't know. They have not had the same opportunity. So you have maybe occasionally some empathy, sympathy, or if there isn't anything you can do, you don't do it. But there will be justice in that. You treat everybody as potentially the same.
So on this lower level of what you call, I think, limited or conditioned consciousness, which is the consciousness that one has when one deals with what is called the outer world, the material world, the tools that you have. It has enormous defenses. It has created all kinds of ramparts around it that would make it difficult, not difficult, but at least these ramparts in the mind or in the experience of the individual are real. The ramparts come in various shapes and forms, all of them designed to make the person unwilling or incapable of acknowledging the absolute, the other zone. These ramparts are one's experience of space, one's experience of time. Also the way it's filtered through the intellect, through reason and logic, which can only understand the language of causality. And on the collective side, culture, nations, ethnicities play their part in confining and constricting. And on the individual side, there's also the element of mind, which has been deconstructed into psychology, into emotions, into sensuality, and all of that. So you have all of these fortresses that modern man, it seems, has built to eliminate in his experience or her experience the traces of the sacred. Let's call it the traces of the sacred. And each one of these fortresses is massive in one's own cognition of it, in the context of limited consciousness. You said that the mind has to be shifted. because it is the point, the narrowest point in which everything is funneled. The illusory reality of these obstacles are nevertheless real for those enmeshed in limited or conditioned consciousness. So the trigger in your case may have been everything came to a point when you saw it embodied in the person of Chinmaya, for example. Before that there were stirrings and yearnings and glimpses and so on. But it took on a channelized form. The notion of the sacred, which has been deconstructed in the mind of modern man, is essential to bring the person the potential to actualize what you experience. Would you agree on that?
I agree with you entirely, except I would also put it in a slightly different frame. I don't need to have the notion of the sacred to seek the absolute. I need to suffer from my day-to-day life. I need to suffer from the inadequacy. I need to suffer from my vacancy. I need to suffer from my not being truly, deeply, sustainably content. That will drive me.
Would you say exhaustion?
Yes,
suffering leading to exhaustion.
A deep, subconscious, if you like, exhaustion. Not physical, not literal, not mental or intellectual. But that I know is not enough. And some sense of desperation. I think if young people whom I've come across in my life, who've had a lot of shocks in their teens, later on disappointments and failures, I think they are far more susceptible to discovering the balance between their higher consciousness and the conditioned consciousness and so on. And we gave these names of sacred and so on. As I said, it is only sacred. I only see nothing other than that absoluteness, diluted, and it appears now to be this is the profane or this is the secular. All of it is emanating from the same, sustained by the same, returning to the same. There is none other than that unique, impossible to demystify oneness and sameness. And I'm part and parcel of that. So the less I am of a mind, the less I have my biography, the less I have identity, the less I am fearful or concerned about time. I use these three as a package: mind, identity, and time issue. The more I am likely to begin to see a bit on the horizon the meaning of events. Otherwise the events become very brutal. I was sacked. Look into the meaning of it. The company is going down, this and that, and I had enmity, there were others. Look at the factors, so it was inevitable. I begin to see order in chaos. And that is closer, if you like, to what you call the sacred. Earlier on in our human endeavors, 3,000–4,000 years ago, everybody looked at events in life through the lens of oneness. Imam Ali says, I don't see anything unless I see the light of God before it, and the light of God in it, and the light of God after it. So you look at diverse issues and events through the lens of oneness. You don't deny otherness or the passage of time, but they'll become far more meaningful and connected. They won't become these haphazard, if you like, issues that causes so many people to feel they are victims. There is no such thing as victim. You were in the wrong place in the wrong time doing the wrong thing. Tough luck. That's about it.
It would seem that you're asking this exhaustion that leads to desperation, in the sense that nothing is satisfying from any self-contained outer system that tries to explain. But at the end of the day, what is left is the stark realization that the only barrier is you. There's the self and its multiple manifestations.
Again, here a language, instead of it being a connector, becomes a barrier. I would not use these. I've tried myself not to use these terms of self-annihilation or fana or death in it. Once I begin to taste an aspect of liberation from that self. The Prophet ﷺ says, your biggest enemy is your own self, within yourself, meaning my ego, meaning my lower self, meaning my self-identity, meaning my biography. So once I've tasted a little bit of something that is more liberating than that, then I can sublimate. I would use the word of transcending, sublimating, going around it, leave the self. Yeah, they tell you, you are such an important person or this and that, fine, let them say it. But I mustn't fall into that pit. You know, I must not, I must be still neutral to whether it is censor or praise. If they praise me, I go up, and I want constancy, I want stability, my soul is ever constant. So I just go around it, leave it there. And then you look back, you say, fine, it is there, you smile at it. You say, of course I have an ego. How can you not have an ego? But it's the extent of it. Is it a real obstacle towards your awakening? Or has it been a good start even? So I wouldn't use, again, theory of the science of the inner, technology of the inner, can cause more also obstacles. That's why earlier on also in my own life, I would not recommend to people who come to me to read any of these Sufi books. The less the better. Live it, be it, taste it. It is that personal access to it, to the taste of what is emitted from the heart. I think the more we intellectualize about Sufism, about spirituality, I think the more cumbersome it becomes. And then people start pulling ranks. I am of a higher, I've read more, I've done it. So what is in the biggest obstacles then will become also the intellectual side. The mind moves on to a very, very highly refined point. That is more difficult to overcome. That is why I think more simple people, simple-minded people, will develop that inner taste of the delight of being in their heart, of being heartful, than the more educated or the wealthy. I find more people who are amongst the poorer people, not abject and really utter misery, but amongst the poorer people who don't have the luxuries of, quarreling about which holiday should they have, where, or for how long. They are easier. They are accessible. They are more humane and more human. Or few of those who have gone beyond wealth is no longer there, if you like, oppressing them. They've gone past it. As Imam Ali says about wealth or whatever, he said, it isn't that you shouldn't own anything. It's, does anything owns you? That is the thing, you see. Zuhud is that, actually. But we hardly live that. We pretend this and we pretend that, and so it doesn't work. It must be total. It must be real.
Models and schemas are appropriate, I think, even in your own teaching experience at an early stage. I mean, now you're not really positing any models or schema, but say 20 years ago, there was the entire panoply of the self and its various components and constituents, and nearly all of it drawn from insights, deep insights into scriptural texts, including the Quran. The pattern of the self as having various degrees, from the commanding self to the blaming self, and so on, reaching the apogee of the contented self. These schemes and these models possibly don't explain the import of what a person is experiencing, and it is best to leave them at a later stage, as you say. But I would have thought that they would be important in terms of trying to reconstruct the idea of self in people who have formulated under different circumstances, conditions. See it in terms of, let's say, the Freudian self or the Jungian self is not necessarily a useful model to have on the kind of unshedding of your myths that this would call for.
I don't deny the usefulness of these models. If I want to get out of myself, it would help me if I have a bit of a sketch as to what is this self, how does it mislead me, what are the vices and the virtues. So it's very helpful. But equally it's important, whilst I am battling with my vices, whilst I'm beginning to be a bit more aware of how I'm trying to cloak my meanness with a bit of a generosity, or my ignorance with a bit of a knowledge, whilst I'm battling with those subtle ways of the self, because anything in existence wants to perpetuate its existence. So does the self. So do we do it collectively. We want to perpetuate the same myth because it had occurred, so we want to continue. The love and the passion for continuation, for everness, is in every aspect of life. So it's important to have a good idea as to how the self operates. But equally, I now emphasize more that this whole thing is an illusion, it's my own invention. Because the real me is a light, which is my soul. So I equally say, yes, read about how the self can disguise itself as a good guy or a good doing this, helpful. But don't forget, all of this is under the light of a soul or a spirit. Once you begin to have a taste of that also, in other words, say no to the self. Yes, the self is a barrier, the self is a blockage. But once you have a bit of a taste of something much higher, then it will be push-pull, as against just push. The soul will pull me. Say, look, you are this, you have tasted, you know it, so behave. So I will be self-accountable or soul accountable in that sense. So it will be an autonomic system. There is a great prophetic teaching is that no self will ever get out of its oppressive state unless it has been given a beam of a light from its soul, from outside it. So you begin to, so there has to be a bit of a crack. For that reason also they say you need to have a teacher who may reflect that for you, who may suddenly tell you all of what you're saying is a lot of rubbish. You know, it may work for a short while, but are you ready to die? Are you content to leave this world? Are you genuinely cheerful about departure or cheerful about continuation longer? So one needs a bit of a challenge that is beyond that basic model of the self and the, if you like, conditioned consciousness. It's very important to look at it, study it, live it, suffer from it, but without that constant reference to something which is far more important, to recalibrate, it becomes a huge thing. So why Buddha's teaching was incredible when he says, there is no such thing as self. But we are living at a time of such sophistication that it's easier said than done. So I say, yes, you have a self, it is on a journey and so on, but where is it started? What is the energy behind it? Occasionally pay attention to that, and if you can, go into oblivion, as our salat does, in your prostration, then you are at the door of that inner Kaaba of light. And so it will be a push-pull situation.
Yani if one is going to look at the evolution, we've now reached the point where there is nothing to be said except immersion in the absolute, a kind of unipolar reality, a reality that has no other reference. It references itself. And you're allowed to partake in this reality because of the mercy of that ultimate reality, whose essence you're unable to fathom. But this world where there are no opposites, the world where there are no dualities, a world where only singularity, and even that may not exist. It's a world that the world with no contours. Ibn Arabi said it's a shore without an ocean, and an ocean without a shore. This world is to access that world, which is always there. It requires, or is never experienced tumultuously in 1 second. It may have been by certain great beings, prophets and so on. And then everything else subsequent to that great event or that great moment becomes simply the infinite unfoldings of that. In reality, in this overwhelming, singular, unipolar reality, Tawheed as it's called, or you're still going back to your own teaching path. There are certain discrete packages or discrete moments all designed, of course, to develop, nurture the taste for this unipolarity. There was the self-soul paradigm, in which the self, with all of its flaws and all of its faults, seeks to mimic the absolute perfection of this unipolar reality as it's manifested in the individual. Then the teaching moves on to consciousness, limited consciousness, universal or supreme consciousness. Other elements of the teaching are to do with zones, zonality of being, zonality of existence, and the connecting thread seems to be the kind of actions, af'al, which engender the internal force that allows one to interact with these various schemas. It is not a linear progression, as I understand it, but rather a different expressions at different moments of the same reality. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Again, there is a seamlessness between the seen and the unseen, between the visible and the invisible, between the absolute and the relative. There is a seamless unity, a unifying factor. But I, who appears or imagine or experience separation, I have to go through these different phases of sensing. The sensory in me is vital as I'm growing from babyhood. The sensory, the awareness becomes more and more, and then the mind begins to develop. And then from the basic crude sensory of I-ness, I begin to develop a wider, if you like, connectedness at many zones through my mind, through my memory, through concepts, through ideation, ideas and all of that. So I have now moved from very crude, basic awareness to a much more complex, if you like, state of consciousness about history, about the past, about the different aspects that constitutes this complex life, to the mind, through the intellect, through reason, through all of the other ideations. And then with maturity and a bit of ability to reflect and the luxury of time, I can transcend it. Through that transcendence then comes also a certain admixture of what is transcendental, which is beyond the mind, and the mind. There are also those zones as well. There are different constructs of the same thing. But essentially that this is the flow of, if you like, consciousness or the evolution of spirituality. From very basic sense of awareness or life, which also began a few 100 million years ago as a very simple life, you know, in the along the seashores or in tidal pools, until, you know, for many millions of years it remained like that. And then suddenly it began to develop into a more what we are now considering as to the whole panoply of the millions of species and so on, to the Homo sapiens. So there is a natural arc of ascent, and we are given the allegory of descent, so to speak, the Adamic creation, that this ultimate consciousness of pure consciousness, and yet it has limited consciousness, the two zones together, the Adamic zone, humanity and divinity, and this metaphorical thing had to descend to earth in order to ascend back by its inner impulse. So we human beings will never be content. No human beings will ever have contentment in a stable, genuine sense in this earth unless they access the timelessness, spacelessness in their own heart. We have the ayah after ayah of the Quran at all times. You are a loser. Losing. Because no matter how much you gain, you're going to give it up. You're going to die. You're going to... Except if you take refuge totally in the unseen. The unseen is infinite. And then you come back and do what you can. Action is important. Until such time, I know I am not the actor anymore. It acts through me. My own soul makes me act. It's no longer my ego. It's no longer my reputation. It's no longer my biography. It's no longer, there is no me anymore. So I'm liberated more and more from the me through action. Initially, I was the actor. I am a generous boy. I've given something to somebody. Later on, it becomes when, if anybody ascribes generosity to them, they're nowhere near generosity. If anybody ascribes, if you like, fearlessness, they're nowhere there. You don't know it anymore. They ask so many of the heroes, how did you become a hero? So I don't know how it became. I just had no option other than I did what I did. So if you look at the life of those who have excelled in extreme sports, at that pinnacle of it, they're no longer them. Why do they like extreme sport? Because at that moment there is no longer an ego. You've gone past fear. You've got yourself geared up, all of that, but then you just jump, you know. There's a big difference, you see. Somebody jumping without knowing what is there waiting for him, somebody else jumping knowing that there is going to be a carpet that will, you know, he will hang on or whatever. The same thing is with action. A point comes that you are no longer the actor, or stop, do not act anymore. You're no longer your own master. Initially, a child wants to be his own master. We have to clap for him to encourage the growth of the ego. With maturity, it stabilizes. With, you know, higher level of awareness and, you know, accessing consciousness, you don't want to act anymore because you will make mistakes. So you want to have authority. The reason we are moving into an age of most young people denounce authority or become rebellious is a proof that they want now to have inner authority. Rebelliousness is not just to rebel. Nobody wants to suffer. All the time, no, no, no. They want yes, but they found that yes is not available from their culture, from their parents, or from their community. Therefore, there is more rebelliousness from religious family or from conventional family or from, if you like, the establishment. This for me is a great sign. On the face of it is problems, terrible. There is a lot of, you know, mistakes and a lot of suffering. But the meaning of it is that they want to have inner authority. They don't want to have an authority imposed upon them. Inner authority is your soul, which you can only access if you stop listening to your mind and to your ego. So you're acting totally with Bismillah, without necessarily saying it. In a culture such as ours, we are trained to don't say anything unless it's Bismillah. It's often said without it meant. There is no focus on it. Bismillah, Bismillah. That's why we take it for granted and we say a lot of things which have a religious connotation, but they have no spiritual impart. They don't leave an impact. So it becomes a ritual without a meaning. So action is vital. Life cannot exist without action. But who is the actor? A time comes that the dancer and the dance are completely inseparable. And then it becomes the most perfect, exalted dance. The same thing with the action. You're doing it for its own sake. You even go beyond fi sabilillah. Initially say, do it for your uncle. Do it for the poor people. Do it for your country. Do it for this. Do it for Jesus. Do it for the Muhammad. Eventually you can't but do that. The inner authority has taken over in a sense. Then you are reasonably safe. Not until then. So long as there is this slightest element of status, personality, or whatever the reputation of do-goodness, you are a very good person, you must contribute, they all arrive. And then they regret it the next day. They caught me on It is inner authority, which is divine authority, which is spiritual authority, which is your soul. That is who you really are. It is the soul which is in exile here for a while. You know, so it is not you, a body with a soul. It is a soul that has been caught in this material thing for a while to show you that physics and metaphysics are inseparable. Matter and energy are inseparable. They are of the same origin. Matter is only energy caught for a while in a certain form, returns back again. And that absolute, which is not in space and time, is the source of it all. And that absolute is the real, if you like, founder, mother, father of the soul. It's not father in heaven. It's mother, father, friend, brother in me.
It seems that the whole thing comes down to maybe, I mean, articulated, but perhaps not in the way that I'm expressing it, is the nature and, as it were, the science of interconnectedness. In a rather hackneyed way, the issue of the butterfly flapping its wings in China and we end up in a hurricane in wherever, in South Africa. This, I think, narrowing it down to a set of cause and effect, probabilistic, statistical states and so on. But if you conceive of these worlds, of these universes, as all merely reflections of, and illusory reflections of the unipolar reality, there is still the element of interconnectedness that makes all of these relationships possible and actualizes them. In the tradition of Islam, it's called barzakh, the interspace, the intermediate space, the connecting thread, the relational thread. But it is where the world of af'al, of actions. It is a universe where various realities interconnect in a way that is very difficult to articulate, but as if it has infinite axes and infinite occurrences in time and space. It's as if we have the Big Bang and the steady state at the same time.
Correct.
So this science, as it were, which I'm sure has its own laws of interconnectedness, the science of barzakhiyya, knowledge of that seems to be critical to actualizing what you have just outlined. That for the limited to understand that it is limited and to acknowledge it and to accept its withering away as greater knowledge becomes more and more established, requires a knowledge also of the interconnectedness of things. This barzakhiyya, which has manifested itself in infinite forms. Some of them we know, some of them have been structured in models of the universe, of the spiritual universe, of the unseen and so on. Would you say that this is a fundamental aspect of understanding the knowledge of the Absolute?
Except that I like to highlight something. I live in a situation where time and space matters, and I'm limited by them, and I'm defined in my actions and in my thoughts and in my knowledges by them. Once you enter into the other zone, then there is a very rapid, accelerated, if you like, diffusion of this business of space and time. Therefore, I would also say, I would like to highlight this, that what we consider this knowledge that has to be cumulative is no longer once you are in that barzakh state. Here, the more knowledge I have, the more knowledge I have. In the barzakh, in this no man's land state, the less I have, the quicker I will experience it. So knowledge becomes an experience and a taste. That's why this word dhawq had been used extensively. You will taste something else. Then you find everything else is of very low significance compared to it. You've tasted something that is of immense joy or bliss or ease that you cannot describe. It's no longer comfort, it's no longer ease, it's no longer any of the pleasures. It is another zone. And the requirement of that barzakhiyya is to come to it with humbleness, to come to it without baggage, without carrying what I have learned in this first zone. Because this has been my life, my crutch, my biography, but that's why the Quran also says you cannot touch it if you come to it unless you have got a pure heart. That means no expectation, you just give up. You have no assumption or presumption. You can't approach it with a man of knowledge. You can't approach it with a man of piety. You cannot approach it with a man of sincerity. All of these you have left behind. You have practiced all of those. But when you come to that ocean, you have to jump, if you like, naked with nothing. And then it will be another zone of space or time. So to us it may appear a second. The Quran also alludes to that. that time becomes relative. One day in that zone is like 1,000 years as you count, or one period or one day is like 50,000 years as you count, and. So here I am judging everything through what I've learned, and it's helped me to survive, it's helped me to relate. But once I'm entering into the other zone, then I must enter with none of the baggage or the so-called advantages I have had now. There'll be disadvantage. I must stop thinking that this is also extended knowledge, this is higher knowledge, esoteric knowledge, God knowledge, all of this will be barriers.
It seemed to me also that formal religion, in the sense that it has deviated from this original knowledge, the knowledge that comes from the opening, the crack, tends to delimit or ignore this element of interconnectedness. You said some event happens, and as a matter of course you say it's God's will, or it's incumbent upon it to happen in this way. This kind of deterministic approach, it certainly is not the nature of interconnectedness. So would you say that one of the paths to regaining, as it were, the experience of the transcendent is not to abandon formal religion as such, but to seek in it those elements that highlight and privilege interconnectedness, which brings you back to the original, the primordial religion?
This is a very, very interesting and a most sensitive issue you are raising. I, as a limited human being on earth with causality, with a reasonable mind, with some education, with some background, with some studies, whatever, I can see the interconnectedness at a very basic level for survival. It's very important. Increased in, so to speak, skills and knowledges and training we go through. Oh, this was because of that and so on. And then I learned so many things are not causal. They are correlation. It just happened alongside, and I think it's part of the causal package or whatever. Then comes another issue that I love a zone that is almost separate from this. What is love? What is this idea of total, utter abandonment of reason? As they say, love is blind. So love without life, life without love is impossible. It is a unifying factor. It's a unifying glue that holds diverse entities together. Now, we all want that. So intrinsically in me lies this desire for another zone that is beyond, if you like, my comprehension in terms of being party to it, in terms of being deterministic. So if I accept that I can exercise power, I have a certain limited freedom, and at the same time, in most other important matters, especially if we give it more time, more space, I really cannot determine it. Therefore, I say it's God's business. All of it is God's business. Even the deterministic side is God's business. But I have been given a bit of a license to play within that, if you like, spiritual kindergarten. Say, no, it is my business. But in truth, all of it is God's business, whether I am interfering or not. Even my interference is based upon my inner intention, attention, ability, and a host of other factors that are environmental. So the path of our deen is do what you can at the zone of you can, and then realize ultimately the outcome is not in your hand. The outcome in the sense of also how does it impact upon me in terms of my contentment, my happiness, there are so many things you do, after 10 years you find it was futile. You did it with goodwill, you did it with good intention, but it was counterproductive. So it is important from early on to have a better map of this issue of freedom or determinism. That in truth, everything is determined in the unseen, from the subtler parts. But when it comes to the seen and the visible, it becomes more and more determined. Our entire Quran is based on ghaib. The whole business defines it. It is الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. يُؤْمِنُونَ is not having faith. You are secure in the unseen. And that the unseen is perfect. because the unseen is emanating from the one and only creator of it, Allah. So it's perfect. So I trust, I take refuge, I am happy and content with what I don't know, which is perhaps 99.999 whatever there is in terms of knowledge. So, but let me also handle the tiny part that I know. I don't deny that. I must do that. اعقل وتوكل. Use my, but give it also as perspective. It's so insignificant compared to the unseen. The same thing as matter. Now we're discovering in cosmos that matter is such a small portion of, and then there is the antimatter, and then there is the dark matter, and so we are on a tiny little earth turning around itself 24 hours a day, hurtling into space at thousands of miles per hour, and the galaxies are all being, and here I want security of tenure. But it doesn't mean that I don't realize that, yes, I'm here for 2 years or 1 year, but it's insignificant to my origin, which is timeless. It's perspective. One of the biggest failures of over-structured religion is perspective, because they want to fix it. Perspective is the whole thing has come as though it was non-existent. The Quran is full of it. They see it far and say, we see it near, and they see it. And when they are reminded of how long did they live, they say, we lived an hour or one afternoon. Perspective is missing. That is why if I am pursuing the science of the self or self-actualization or self-whatever, if I don't realize, I also every now and then refer that the whole thing is nonsense, because I want to go beyond the sense. It then becomes another idol. You see, that's the issue.
I go back to this relational matter, because you said once, and it's a form of truism, but it's true only because very few people see it, that matter is a form of entrapped light. If you just go the E equals mc squared equation, m by definition is E divided by c squared. So the relational aspects of anything, it seems to be, is integral to the divine pattern, if I may call it, of knowledge. That you cannot know things simply by assertion. You cannot know things even by experience. It's a form of knowledge. But the real knowledge is assertion, experience, and relations between the two. So the relational aspect of it, the barzakhiya aspect of it, the intermediary aspect of it, is essential to have iman or security, the way that when all the great religious traditions require a, quote, a leap in faith, but it is not really a leap in faith. It's a form of recognition that establishes relations. So when you say that there is security in the unseen, are secure in their knowledge of the unseen, there is an implicit confirmation of that security by experience, by knowledge. These relational aspects are fundamental, I think, in your teachings as to how these disparate, infinitely disparate elements connect each other into a point. So the circumference goes to the point through the relational aspect. I mean, 2 pi r or pi r squared. The science of the barzakh, the knowledge that emanates from the science of interconnectedness, in classical times was expressed in certain schemas and models of the universe and of the way that the absolute manifests itself. Of course, the first manifestation of the absolute, you have said in the past, was to do with self-manifestation as a result of love, the unfolding of that. These various hierarchies that were in the past spoken of may or may not exist in this form, but they surely have a reality as relational realities. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I don't deny any of that. And I sum it up for you by saying that E equal mc square is true at this zone, and is not true at in the absolute or in the higher consciousness. Speed of light is apparently like the, if you like, the barrier in this zone. But light from the sun to us takes 8.4 minutes to come. But from your own khayal, if you really enter into that khayali zone, you can go to the sun, twirl around it 10 times and return in 2 seconds. Much faster than light. And this is khayal also. It has a semblance of a reality. It's an echo of reality. So my soul is a universal entity. It's not limited to the speed of light or any of these other things. But I think all of these models are important. The interconnectedness are important. And when you enter into that barzakhi, in that no man's land space, some other chemistry takes place. You will come to accept and appreciate how from the absolute, indescribable, whatever name we like to give it, again, it limits it by a name, singularity, absolute. Everything has a connectedness. Everything is wrapped by that oneness. That oneness is throughout every aspect, every possibility, is space and time of it. This is the mystery. And that mystery, once it is known, then outer knowledge, limited knowledge, spatial, whatever, will not fascinate you anymore. You have, in a way, you have become ashes which produce this amazing new, if you like, celestial reality. And that compensates for any other idea of a loss.
You mentioned the soul as emanating its lights to the self. The receptivity of the self is to a large extent determined by those qualities, its own barzakhiyya, which has been expressed, and you had expressed it before, in the classical form of these, the faculty of the imaginal faculty, the faculty of attributing value to things, the faculty of reflection, of recollection, the faculties of the common sense, that the inner common sense that binds all of these things. These are, I suppose, they're not empirically determined, but they are determined in this unseen sense, empirically, in the sense that there is an absolute assuredness as a result of structuring the experiment and finding its results. So if one does an inner experiment on the efficacy of these engines, as it were, of knowledge and cognition, by which the self receives from the soul its signals, these faculties appear to me to be on the point of disappearing in actualization in modern man. But you see it opposite. You see that modern man, on the contrary, a postmodern man, might have more of that capacity rather than less of that capacity. I see it, in fact, practically non-existent, except amongst very, very few individuals.
You're right. I'm not saying it is not disappearing. I'm not saying it. All what I was saying is that the need for it to be resurrected is more. I use, for example, rebellion amongst the young and educated as a sign of that, of a need to regain it, because it's there and I am alive because of it. We are alive because of the soul. But as a matter of, if you like, passage of history or few hundreds of years or civilization, it is true. It is becoming more and more rare. But it will rejuvenate, because human beings is the ultimate pinnacle of both awareness, of perfect awareness or supreme awareness, and awareness of the material, limited, and so on, both. So I think it will regain. I don't think you can suppress it. The soul is not suppressible. God is not suppressible. It's supreme. But these are little cycles in the huge cycle of, if you like, of this tiny creation of ours on this earth, a few billion years. So my optimism is in the macro scale. But in the micro scale, what you say is absolutely true. It is almost extinct now. That's why we are suffering with all the incredible amount of, high quality order, or the globe being so close. I mean, 100 years ago, what we have nowadays in terms of, if you like, human right or qualities hardly existed. So there are all of these advantages. I think God's plot is that He's preparing it for a much different way of rise towards that awakening.
Because if I was the soul and there's no relational connection, I would pack up and move on.
No, but He's in charge. The soul is still in charge, although it's like a father who is so wise that allows the little kid to think that I am in charge. This is my home, this is my things, this is my money. Fine. There is, if you like, a great deal of benevolence and rahmah. But I think it's only Allah's plot. He's the only plotter. He's the only schemer. All of my little schemes are tiny, insignificant, acts within that greater scheme. So if I allow myself occasions of simply seeing what is in front of me, what is happening, what is the meaning of happening, I have access to my soul. In other words, if I stop being constantly in that box of my mind that I have done this and this happened, and then I will miss the higher meaning. It's very important for every now and then to stop, say, what happened, why? And then don't always remain in the box of the mind. And look at Allah's hand. Look what Allah's message is. In all of our former religions also they say God's will prevail. So let me occasionally calibrate my will to see whether it is within God's will. Because I want success. Nobody wants failure. But God's will is the zone of victory, because success will have failure. I want victory ultimately. So let me occasionally stop to calibrate. Is this the right time? I may be a good, I may be a very generous person, but I may make more damage by that generosity. You know, we have had so many examples in our history that out of love and out of goodwill, they say the way to hell is paved with goodwill. You have to be careful. What is the ultimate reference? If my reference is not going to be that inner light within me, authority within me, the soul or spirit within me, then the rest remain theoretical. God in heavens, God somewhere else. What about His representative in me? What about His hook of life that's giving me life in my heart? This technology needs to be used. And this was known, lived in the past, but life was so simple. Now we have complexities in life. Therefore, we need to, in a way, make it more accessible. That don't deny your ego, don't deny yourself, don't deny your will, but watch out, ultimately your will is a tiny fraction in what will come about as the ultimate outcome. Whether it is at the individual level, family level, country level, national level, political level, economics level. That is why the question of the black swan is real. That is why the tipping point. All of this happened. But we're always taken by surprise and we blame somebody else. Unfortunately, so-and-so. No, there's no unfortunate. There's always fortunate. It has happened because I was focused on what I wanted to be focused on. And we always exaggerate the importance of what we're focused on. And so we miss. That's why we have to stop. If we don't regularly stop and go into thoughtlessness, aimlessness, the power of aimlessness. We can't calibrate. We get carried over and we are destroying ourselves.
It would appear to me that the structuring of religions and then its formalization and its hierarchies of authority and so on seem to conspire against that. They seem to overlook, then reject, or sometimes crush this thread that leads back to the primordial state of consciousness. What is then the future for religion as a path by which individuals can regain knowledge of and experience of this supreme consciousness?
I think it's a question of balance. You need a structure and you need also the inner light together. Haqiqah and Sharia, Mecca, Medina. Medina without Mecca or without living as though you are totally, utterly oriented towards the light of Mecca, then it will be barren. And Mecca will be an esoteric idea without a Medina. So the two are together. This is a perennial dilemma. You need a structure But you equally need to have that structure constantly illumined by and superseded by the knowledge that it is only there for a purpose. And if that purpose is lost, then that purpose is transcendental, as you have to go beyond the limitation of your mind. Otherwise, it becomes nothing other than competing, as we are now, in having who has the biggest cathedral, who has the biggest mosque, who has the highest. It's absurd. We have reduced religion into an absurd reality as such, because it has almost become, we have made it, devoid of its inner light and delight and transformative aspect. It's a very intricate balance, not easy. For that you need prophetic beings. That's why I think Islam was, to a great extent, distracted, derailed, whatever, soon after the departure of the Prophet. It remained for a few hundred years because it was the only real workable package in the ocean of the darkness of those days.
I mean, this type of religion also, or modern religions as a whole, they have lost, in Europe and to a lesser extent in America, they seem to have lost any serious adherents. And in the rest of the world, they seem to have reinvented themselves in something that is extremely distant from this, this primordial cognition, as it were. So nearly all religions define the truth in terms of their own self-definition, in terms of their own expounding on what is true and what is not true. The idea of conflict appears to be built in, and I throw secularism as a religion too.
Yes.
All of these, in the sense of an attempt to organize the frames of consciousness in outer forms of reality, outer forms of ritual beliefs and so on. Yeah. It begs a question, why go through these formal structures of worship if all they do is to reinforce the exclusivity of one path rather than another?
But everything is exclusive and inclusive at the same time. We want conclusion, and we want immediate conclusion. I don't want to have something that promises me only in the hereafter. I want to taste it now. I want to be assured right now. The hereafter is now. Timelessness is now. And these were actually the foundations of these, important paths of arrival. But it is we who have reduced it to that. We have become habituated and more competitive and so on. But everybody is special. Every religion is special. Every individual is special. Every individual is sacred. And we want to be special because within me lies something which is more than special. The rare of the rarest, which is the soul. So that's why we look for the rarest gem. We look for the rarest this. And once something becomes common and familiar, we don't like it. We actually don't even witness it. You go to a room and you only notice that which has changed, not that which was there before. We are all the time looking for the most, if you like, rare, most sublime, most unusual thing. And that's your soul. So I think it's all emerging, even in literature, even in airport novels. It shows more and more that we are spiritual beings, first and foremost. Then we have to also be material and all of that. But in our day-to-day life, we have been totally, if you like, imprisoned, enslaved to the money-making mechanism and the controlling. I think a time will come that many people will opt out of it, not as dropouts, by choice. Say, no, thank you, I'll take half of whatever it is because I want to live in the country or do something. It's not yet come. I think people will be discriminating. I think Europe especially are still suffering from the impoverishment of wars and things. And we don't realize that within 100 years, somewhere between 500 to 800 million people were killed in warfare. The two European wars were small amount. We are a warring, because I am not happy. I am not content. Therefore, war against everybody else, and of course, it would be war against me. Until I make peace with myself, how can I make peace with anybody else? So these things are beginning to emerge. I think the changes in the last 50 years have been enormous, and I think they will lead us to realize that all of these religions were in balance. They meant the outer and the inner, but they became faction, they became divisive, and this and that. So It's the nature of this temporary conditioned consciousness is to be divisive. We want to pigeonhole. Are you belonging to this? And no, it's not quite. It's divisive. But if that divisiveness doesn't refer to its origin of oneness constantly and calibrate, and again, in a way, be constantly at all times referencing, and it won't work. It will be out of balance. I know I am here as a entity, identity temporarily, but I don't like anything temporary. I like joy to be forever.
I just would like to unroll, as it were, back to where we originally left off in your biography, where you've met Chinmaya, we've left Chinmaya, you met the various spiritual masters, let's call them, and then you disconnected with the world of business and commercial transactions in which you had excelled, and decided to move to the United States, where you established a community called Beit al-Din. And then that community replicated itself in Pakistan, in England, in Sweden, and finally in South Africa, where you came in 1994, I think, or 93. Looking at your experience in terms the association between awakening, let's call it, and the establishment of communities, if one can reflect over this experience, it seems that these communities, apart from the last one now, in which you're at its center, seem to have did not have much of a permanent presence. Has that made you rethink what is the relationship between community, spiritual leadership, let's call it, or guidance, and the transference or the transmission of the kind of knowledge that you want to impart to people? I won't say they were a success or a failure. I would just statement of fact that they have not cohered as communities, either in the United States, Sweden, UK, Pakistan. There are a number of people who are connected to you and continue to be connected to you. Hundreds, possibly thousands, I don't know, but hundreds certainly. But there is no horizontal links between them.
It seems as though I had gone to establish a community or to teach, but in its own passage, there were no such determined or preconceived ideas. It was part of a connectedness and an extended family. I am very much by nature also a social person, and as part of my own family there was an extended, and it extended a bit more, and when the time and the means were there, so you do a bit more. It was a natural part of my own life. It wasn't, I never thought I'm staying in the United States. I never thought I'll do much more in Sweden or in England or in Germany. It was a natural drift, if you like. I always responded. People thought I could contribute to their knowledge about whether it is an aspect of the Quran or an aspect of human spiritual quest. If it touched me, I would respond. So that's how really it was. In retrospect, I have no regrets. I cannot say they were good, they were bad. I think it was part of my life. And in every situation, I walked away without the slightest hesitation. I think that was a big test upon me. When I remember writing on a desk somewhere, and so on, I felt something deep in me as though it said, this is the last time you're here. And often it was so. I like the people in Pakistan. Culturally, I connected. The love of Quran, Arabic. In America, there was a freshness. In Sweden, there was a seriousness. So it was part of my life's journey, in a sense. It was actually Sufi Barkat Ali once told me, when I told him I'd like to stay in his Zawiya in Faisalabad, outside Faisalabad. He said, no, you will be north, south, east, west. And I remembered him often. So it was like a siyaha for me. seeing people from different walks of life, professionals, well-placed people, politicians, some other places. You know, where I did some work in South America and Costa Rica, some very prominent people embraced Islam, the son of at that time ministers. And so it was really for me traveling the earth and see, and it was part of my own education and growing up.
You seem to have attracted an extraordinary collection of people.
For years they were.
And various kinds of exiles and intellectuals,
yes,
and ex-hippies. And
yes, yes, all kinds. And ex-Vietnamese soldiers and all kinds. I always responded. It was never pre-planned or premeditated, or there was a structural filter for it in any way. I went for hearts. Some of the people were very simple, very basic. Some of them were miskeens and really destitutes. I only responded to what was in front of me. It was a reflection of me. It was, I had really been much more of a mirror to whatever comes across it. And that mirror had its own self-evaluation. And sometimes it reaches a point that I know it's a bit abusive and so on, and it closes down. Without, in a way, structuring what I'm going to say now, or premeditating it, always an inner signal that prompted me to help someone do something, go for a project, or drop it. And I must say that it has been the biggest gift upon me, that whenever a project came to an end or near an end, it didn't leave any trace on me, or on my heart at least. And I walked away with no regrets.
You walked on rather than walked away.
Right, yes, true. Yes, they are the same. We walk from something. There was an intrinsic, if you like, drive towards the absolute. And the outer experiences were only like churning and going through, where action emanates from inaction, from the unseen, and manifests in the seen. And I was in it and part of it, and that's it. Not much memories, not much nostalgia, not much. I mean, there were lots of films made, photographs taken, but I've never had any interest whatsoever to keep any, propagate any, reproduce or talk about it. I had for many years been very fortunate of relishing the moment and the joy of the moment and the infinitude of the moment, of the now. So none of these past events somehow come as precipitation, or as if I am aware of it. I can even recall some of it with certain modification, like all memory. And obviously certain things are modified inadvertently. So it is, as you have said, that I've been exposed to all kinds of people from the land, from other lands, high, low, and in between. And as though it was for my inner observer, shahid in me, the witnesser in me, to show me to what extent am I being influenced or not influenced. Very positive, healthy neutrality. So somebody of influence comes and they say, we would like to do this, and after a month they change their mind. Of course, initially I get motivated, and later on I have no regrets or hardly any upset. You know. I take it more and more factual, with an emotional touch, not without, but just a touch.
I'm sure there was no conscious plan to recreate the Karbala of childhood in any of these experiments, or not experiments, but any of these evolutions. But again, it begs the question: what is the function then of a community? Because once you have more than one person who acts as teacher and guide, and a satellite number of people who appear to want to be where he is, but may not want, in reality, are prepared to go through the inner, what the Sufis call tahliya, takhliya, tasfiya, the process of sweetening or doing away with, followed by the abandonment and then the purification. This is the necessary preconditions. And when you know that few of them are prepared to go through this process of self-examination, how does a community then continue as a conscious living body?
As you know, in most cases it doesn't. But at the time itself, I, for one, never evaluated the possibility whether this person is going to move on or not. It was at the moment I see somebody is in need or in desperation, or they benefit from a few months of being in a place where they are with the right company. Because I knew myself, for example, how important is companionship. You can't be in isolation. And I had the time and the means and the ability to provide those havens. They were really havens in different periods of my life, which I enjoyed and benefited from as well, and so did my family. And it moved on, the caravan moves on. I remember the beautiful saying from the Prophet, as time will come, that people who love haqq and truth become like jackals taking their family by their neck from one hillock to another to avoid, if you like, all of the dreadful situation that they are confronted with. So I felt myself really as I am a constant migrant, and I never resented it either. I just allowed it. I wasn't sure which country, where, how. For example, that I wanted very much to end up in Pakistan. It was not to be, so I ended up in South Africa. I evaluated the situation at the moment, take the best outcome, take the best counsel, and move on, and hardly looked back.
Nearly every one of the of the people that you had come across who were in this shuyukh, let's call them, I mean that's what they are, teachers, guides, nearly all of them have tried to establish some form of community, yeah, with rules and rituals. Are all these efforts redundant or doomed in modern times?
No, I don't think we can stop that. But as an overall trend, from my childhood, I knew the days of where I grew up in Karbala, which was also a community, which had a very secure, visible as well as invisible foundations. I knew it's over. And when I was with Shaykh Abdul Qadir and other Sufis, I also knew the traditional way and the paths of Sufis is also over. The teachings is never redundant. The connection, human aspects, all of that is never. But the way it functioned, that close-knit and always reinforcing itself, and the flavor of it is over. So it's not doomed. I don't think we can ever stop being social. And that implies also being with like-minded, like-hearted people. I think that will continue, but it will be much more maybe on the internet and much more on the social media rather than physical proximity. Maybe once a year or once every other year they may be able to get together. The model, as we had seen it in the past, will be modified considerably. The need and the demand and the trend and the thing would continue. Human beings have to reflect and be reflective until such time they know that the truth is one and everything else emanating from that draws its reality from that, and that all is done already. Therefore, there is very little in actual fact you can do independent of these multitudes of patterns and schemes that create the basket of so-called existence.
That have in them the ease of association and the smoothness of dealings and transactions. It would appear to me that this is a very, very solitary affair because one cannot locate all the time like-hearted, like-minded people, and you can't really postpone this thing. There's an urgency to it. So solitariness seems to be built in these days into this process, irrespective of outer associations. I mean, you can have a family, you can have part of a community, member of a chamber of commerce, but yes, still live a kind of solitary, yes, inner life.
There's always been like this. Throughout human history, we know that all the great beings, the prophets before them, after them, for at least the last 20, 30,000 years that we have some traces of prehistoric time, man has been like that, staying in caves until such time you realize that alone is not so much alone, it's all one. So it is. So, and in recent times also, the solitary parts of seclusion, of retreat, is essential part of that. But you realize at the end of the day that you're not the only one. Everybody else is the same. There is sameness. But you have been fortunate in being able to be given more time to reflect or be alone or solitary and so on. We are both. You are both one, and you have within you the pattern and the design of multiplicity, of a whole nation. So we need that until such time it becomes almost indifferent, whether you are with others or not, when the inner core of inner knowledge, taste and experience of oneness, then it doesn't matter so much. Earlier on, one needs strict periods of being isolation, to recoup, to regenerate, until such time comes you are both by yourself alone, and yet you are with the entire universe. They resonate so closely to each other that you find there are two facets of the same thing. There is only one, you are also only one, and you cannot deny the infinitude of what has come from the one, sustained by the one, and that includes you as well. When you yearn for it, then it's a sign that the business is not being completed. That's why it is defined as he who has arrived at that real inner station of reality will not wish to be in the shade when he is in the sun, or when he is in the sun wishing for the shade. In other words, he is living the moment in its infinitude. So the same thing, that solitary, the need or the desire for being alone to recoup and regenerate is hardly there anymore, except purely at the physical level. You just need to rest the body or whatever. It is not going to be a drive away, as Mullah Sadr puts it, the first journey, away from creation and the trouble towards the Creator. You see, there is only the Creator, and He's put you in that position. So how can you object to that?
Well, he was alone for 30 years, so that probably concentrated his mind. No, it is just that the appeal of solitariness, without being turning it into a principle of withdrawal, is that you do not allow other, let's call it contaminants of power and control and so on to deflect you from.
True. But also that can be only tested when there are others. You get better and better understanding of the pattern and the mapping and the reality of it. But how it impinges upon the individual can only be assessed when you are with the others.
But withdrawal while being within them surely is the last cycle in these famous 4 journeys.
Yes. You are with them, but your heart truly is totally, utterly, in every way connected with that which is the source and the essence of all connection. So then everything matters in a way, and in truth nothing matters. You are harisun alaykum, you have some care, but you have no concern, you can't do it. It's not in your hand. You're at best an agent. So that's it. So you are here, not of here. You are involved, but it doesn't in any way overwhelm you, You are closer to the essence from which everything emanates, but no attribute is really ascribed to it.
I mean, solitariness not in the sense of I am a solitary man, stay away from me, but in the sense of being an appropriate description of a condition.
Yes. And willingness to take on the situation where if everybody suddenly runs away from you, are you the same? I was recently asked by somebody in power that what can I make a comment? I said, yes, you are now a prime minister, but your state, if tomorrow you are dismissed, your inner state remains the same, then you are at a very high station in terms of spiritual awakening. But if your state now is due to the chair you have, and tomorrow you will suffer and you weep, then you are far from being, close to your soul.
There are examples, I suppose, in history of those who were in this condition, and then when circumstances were not appropriate, they turned and walked away from what seemed to be perennial or perpetual struggle.
Yes.
I mean, I was thinking of Amir Abdul Qadir, for example,
Yes.
when he
Absolutely.
lost the battles, just walked away.
Absolutely. Also, he had by then realized an impossible situation, the treachery of the people around him, and that there was some goodness. Something called him also that to realize that it isn't exclusive and so on. There is some goodness amongst the colonials. There was some, and in fact, that made him realize also how treacherous was the situation in Istanbul. So it's part of the, it's permissible, it's possible. I think I've heard of Sufi teachers who were very much in the arena and the teaching and the people and decided to be reclusive towards the end or whatever, and they shoved them. What's wrong with that? I think this is a personal choice. And
I mean, I asked this question because it leads into another category that I would like to explore. How, as it were, this spirit, these relational intermediary aspects of the absolute and the relative, we know through this mapping how they play out in human beings. We also know that they may not necessarily play out with the same dynamic in collectivities. But how do they play out in time, which is the stuff of history? You have events following events, an apparently randomless process. One day you're enjoying your cup of coffee at the coffee shop at the World Trade Center, and the next day there's a new world war because of some people ramming into a building. How do these events in the outer frame of things, outside of the microcosm of human beings, how do you see these events interconnected? Some of the great philosophers, like Hegel, for example, thought that this is the way in which the absolute or the divinity, the absolute, let's say, manifests itself in time through events, and the interconnectedness of events is as real in knowledge of the absolute as the individual experience.
Well, I'm sure.
Would
I'm
you accept
sure
that?
of that? Except that I would say that even at many of these situations, there are causal links that we have not discerned. We are not sensitive enough. So I wouldn't go even as high as to the absolute. I think there is a lot of cause and effects that follow the realm of the barzakhiyya in a way. That we can't hear it, we can't, the rumbling, whatever, the earth is beginning to stretch somewhere. There is a, we know that elephants predicted a tsunami way before it arrived through their, the sensitive, if you like, interpretation of it, and they went up towards higher land and so on. So there are a lot of these major, what we call natural disasters or shocks or whatever, or human, they've got their subtle causal things, but we can't read them at the time, especially. The cause of the First World War is very clumsy to say it was the assassination of a person. They've been building up, this is the straw that sinks the camel or kills it. So I think it's a question of what can we discern that affects us, and of course we had to respond. And there is so much that we don't. I think these, in a way, enhance the living trust and faith of the seekers. Say, look, I just don't know. It happens. I don't know. Allah did it. It's a big relief to see a poor peasant woman in India having her 6-month-old child suddenly dying with a fever one night. God gave me that, and God took it away. But the more educated they are, the more they try to find out why and what and who to blame and what insurance to claim. I think in that simple division of the zone that I understand and the huge, universe that I don't understand, I think that's a very helpful one. I deal with what I can, and it's beyond me, and leave the rest without speculation. And somebody else would say it was a direct God hand to punish them. I think this is a lot of rubbish. God is not a punisher. God is this. Quran declares that you only punish yourself by your stupidity and your wrong action. But there are so many of these events that take place on Earth and through our solar system, and. Any minute an asteroid can hit us. So many misses that have been reported in the last few years. I don't see it that way. I don't see the direct hand of God. I see there is nothing other than the hand of God. But filters through all kinds of, if you like, layers of lights and eventually comes. I see there is only God. And therefore there is nothing other than He. Well, it's only that reality. Everything else is a small reality, but it appears as though it has some semblance of independence. There's no such thing. Total dependence. Utter. And the more we see that, the more, as I said earlier, your authority will be subservient to that authority. So I can't do it, I'm not sure. But then you will come to know. And that's why there are so many things we can do, but if you are vague as to the real intention behind it, and if it is the right timing, then do it or you don't do it, you see. There are so many things that we are hesitant about. You don't have to do it. But we constantly are in the muddle of a situation that has no clarity. What is your intention? If my intention was to help somebody, good, do it, even though they may resent it. But, then go back to them and apologize. Say, I did it with good intention, but excuse me, you're not happy. Fine. This is then learning again how to make one's will subservient to the divine will. I only see one will. I only see one qudra, one ability, one power. But we've been given a tiny little fraction of that to realize that it is the one power. I've not been given this out of fun or game. I've been given all of the possibilities of attributes of Allah. Life, power, thinking, hearing, all the senses, ability to express myself. All of this as part of the parcel of the many attributes that has emanated from the source as fields of energies.
At another level of abstraction, when one talks about an individual, it is a self-contained universe, and in many ways one can relate to the individual because there are points and agents where actions is done and decisions are made and so on. As you move to higher levels of abstraction, communities, for example, you can look at them as having a reality over and above their individual nature. And we've explored how the community interacts or fails to with the signals that emanate from the one, so that they recognize that their reality lies in acknowledgement of that. But as you move into other levels of abstraction, like movement of time is really a sequence of events as they unfold. You end up with entire nations and civilizations, and if you look at the major scriptural texts, they all refer about to rise and fall of civilizations as in a kind of matter-of-fact determinist, not a deterministic way, but in a matter-of-fact way. That what goes up is bound to come down. My question really is to do with how a collection of non-sentient phenomena, events, how do these connect with the movement towards the one? And this I find extremely compelling because it is not necessarily used for either analytical or prescriptive or prescriptive purposes, or to forecast the future, or even sacred history, which I think is a way of expressing events without necessarily including time into them. Everything is jumbled up. The Abraham and Ismail, everything is put into one pot. Moses, it all seems to be timeless. So sacred history is really events that are in sacred time, but they are not really the way that I would like to. They cannot be given, as it were, an empirical or a document-based evidence. One can never prove that this is what happened there and then. I find it's quite futile, in fact, to speculate where Abraham, whether he went to Mecca or not, is or where he emerged from. It's just interesting. However, if the one, the absolute, infuses all phenomena, not just all sentient beings, how does the actions of the absolute engage with events as they move in time? How does the interconnectedness of events relate to knowledge of the absolute?
There is a unifying field in the cosmos, or totality. But that field has got in it different rungs and different layers and different levels. The sentient is different from the non-sentient as well. But I take it on trust that they are connected. And how they are connected, I'm not sure. What influences which and how do they, I can't. But I see a unifying field throughout existence from the point of the Big Bang. There is interconnectedness between that immense heat that occurred earlier on and the thousands of degrees of centigrade that is also still within us in the center of the earth. It's almost as hot as the surface of the sun. And so I see there is something beyond our ability now as human beings to map out fully. So therefore there are huge gaps in our seeing the oneness, the interconnectedness of the seen and the unseen, and the unseen being far, far, far more than the seen. That's why I think our science is at its infancy. It's very crude and very basic. Coming back to the issue of earth and ecology and so on, I think early man had that sensitivity. They would hear things more, they would respect things more, and so on and so forth. But we have become too exploitive. And that is why we will collectively suffer from ecological, environmental degradation and not regarding it as, spiritual ecology. I think these could be part of the subtle ways beyond us to fathom at the moment of how God in His infinite wisdom and mercy wanted us to collectively wake up, that we are not here just to exploit and use and abuse, because we all suffer. We all get suffocated from the excesses of the poison that we generate. So I believe, I feel, I know there is that interconnectedness. So by extrapolation, I say it must be at every level. But I can't discern it, I can't relate to it or define it. Why is it sometimes suddenly a person's intuition dictates to move out of some situation? In my own case, for example, to leave Iraq. I would have been probably more successful materially or career-wise and so on, but I wouldn't have been as content as I am. And so there are a lot of things that we do which we say it was by the sixth sense or subconsciously. I don't know why I did it. Back again to the issue of love. It is a mysterious thing. People don't know why they have loved this or that or the other, or in terms of personal also relationship of love. We don't know what makes it. Small little something triggers off a... So there are, I think, far more interconnectedness between the sentient, non-sentient, seen, unseen, higher, lower, millions of forces of energies and of cosmic rays that we don't know what they're doing. We don't know clearly what their influences are. I take it on trust that in the little stage of my own personal reflection and connectedness, I've seen wonders upon wonders upon wonders, and I trust it. So there is no longer a personal, if you like, agenda in that. In other words, when it comes to also abandoning the so-called my life, any minute, if I'm not ready, then I have not progressed, even in the evolutionary sense, along higher level of consciousness. It's not my life. If the so-called my life has not led me to realize infinite life, and to know that there is something in me that is resonating with infinite life, which is my soul, then I am exceptionally very crude in my progress. So.
I'd like to conclude, and it's very difficult to ask you to encapsulate this tremendous life journey in one or two statements. Die before you die would be one of them, I assume.
I wouldn't use that. It's frightening for the present mind. I say you are not who you think you are. You're not who you think you are whatsoever. And the way to know who you are, you must stop thinking. And to realize essentially that you are driven by these 3 C's. To connect. We all want to connect. Every human being, no matter what. Connect, connect, connect. Laterally, horizontally, physically. Connect, connect, connect. Because the root of everything in existence is ever connected. A jama. The other one is continue, continue, continue. Whatever I do, I want it to be forever. Am I forever? Are you forever? Is this, so it is to get out of space and time. Connect is to end space. No distance. Continue is end of time. Forever. The third one is consciousness. In order for us to live that model, we have to realize that everything we experience is based on dualities. The good and the bad and the up and the down, and they exchange positions. And the most important thing from that is that the soul, self-soul interplay is again part of that duality. I am in this world, not of this world. I am temporary, and within me lies the permanent. And the more they are in unison, the more I've completed as far as I can complete. So I need a diagram, I need a map, I need people, I need friends who are like-minded, like-hearted, so that this map or these diagrams begin to be internalized. And I test it, and I live it, and I say it is true. Then I've done what little I can. So therefore, if I live longer, shorter, my work bring me a lot of wealth or less wealth, it will not be overwhelming. I will have access to the inner balance and the inner constancy of something which is sacred. But I think I would use less and less any of these terms. I think everything is sacred. I think everything is divine. Everything is emanating from the one. But the more I look at existence through that lens, the more everything makes sense to me. The more short-term disasters, difficulties will not overwhelm me. And nobody likes to be overwhelmed by disaster. We all want to avoid that which we don't like. But we will always be subjected to God's generosity in being given shock after shock. But people don't wake up. We blame everybody else, and I don't blame myself for not having been prepared for the shock. How can I be prepared for the shock unless I take refuge within me into a zone that is beyond shock, which is my soul? So this is the map that I really feel is going to be more and more available and used by people. You don't need to have a belief, you don't need to have faith, you just live it, do it. And then you find it is there. That's really how I would like to conclude.
And it would seem that this is the primordial religion, or the Deen al-Hanif, as the Quran says. It is the teachings of Moses, Jesus, Buddha.
Absolutely. I believe it's only the doer is
the Prophet Muhammad.
Absolutely. وَلَا فَاعِلَ إِلَّا هُوَ. Allah is doing it. So if somebody asked me, what about you? I said, yes, He allowed me to do it, but I'm doing it by His permission, by His authority, or by His name. Otherwise, I'll suffer. And I've been programmed not wanting to suffer.
Well, thank you very much, Shaykh Fadhlalla, for your wonderful discourse and allowing me to have this dialogue and this conversation.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Salam, salam, salam.